Good morning. Today we're going to be working on replacing the steering knuckle assembly and wheel bearing on this 2005 Chevy Aveo. The first thing we're going to do is put some bricks behind the back wheels, loosen the lug nuts, get it up on jack stands, and remove this front tire. Here are some of the basic tools you're going to need for this project. We've got our tire iron, our ratchet wrench, our breaker bar, torque wrench, assorted hammers, Phillips screwdriver, sockets, a set of wrenches, and an extension. I also have my small air compressor, which is super handy if I'm working on something somewhere else or I don't have to drive the car around to the shop to the big air compressor. It's super convenient. I also have my air cat, my impact socket set, and my trusty cup of coffee. And also my Husky impact wrench. Next, we're going to remove the brake caliper. There's two bolts that are holding this on. There's one up top here, and then the other one is down here on the bottom. And to do this, you're going to need your 19mm socket. And these bolts are going to be on there very tight, so I've got my breaker bar to help me, give me some leverage to loosen these up. Then once you've got your caliper off, you want to make sure you have your bungee ready so you can hang it up so it doesn't put stress on the brake line. I put the bolts back in temporarily so I don't lose those. Next, we're going to take the rotor off. There's two screws on here. They're Phillips screws right here. Next, we're going to remove the axle nut, and I have a 1 1/4 inch socket here on my breaker bar. Next, we're going to remove these 4 nuts. There's one here on the control arm, one here on the tie rod end, and then these two up here on the strut tower. For the nut on the control arm here and the nut on the tie rod end, you're going to need a 19mm. I couldn't get a socket on this one, so I'm just going to use a wrench. I'm going to loosen them all up before I remove any of them. Then for these guys here on the strut tower, it's a 17mm on both sides. I'm going to put a wrench on here and then I'll use my impact on the other side. Now that I've got all four loosened and I know none of them are going to give me a major problem, I'm going to go back and remove all four of them. I've removed the nut from the control arm and the tie rod end. Next we are going to use our puller tool, puller fork tool to remove the tie rod end and the control arm. We've got the tie rod end out and we've got the control arm loose. We can take our two top bolts out of the strut tower. Again, these are 17 on both sides. I've already got them loose, so this should be pretty simple. I damaged the boot on the tie rod end, so I'll have to run to the auto parts store and get a new one of those. So I ran to the auto parts store and got the new tie rod end here. I'm going to take the old one off. Oh, we're going to screw the new one on. Then on the tie rod end here, there's this backup nut. We're just going to back it up so it's snug against this. I've also damaged the boot on the lower ball joint here, connected to the control arm, and I picked up a new one of those at AutoZone as well when I was there. We're going to change that out too. There's a It's hard to see here. There's a couple bolts, but they're on the control arm here. We're just going to take those out so we can replace this. Here I've got the old steering knuckle assembly and the new steering knuckle assembly with the wheel bearing already installed. And the reason I bought the whole steering knuckle assembly instead of just the wheel bearing itself is because I don't have a press. I don't know anyone that has a press, and I thought it would be easier to just install the whole part than find somebody with a press and pay them to install the new wheel bearings in the old knuckle. Plus it's pretty old. It's the original one from the, when the car was new. So we're going to open it up and make sure they match. So here we have the unboxed new steering knuckle assembly. It came with a new axle nut. It did not come with the shroud, so we're going to have to take the old shroud and put it on the new part because it does have the holes for it right here. So it looks like it's ready to go. I'll leave the link to this steering knuckle assembly in the description in case you guys want to pick up the same one to make installation of the wheel bearing a little easier. I'm going to let the PB blaster soak in on those screws on the shroud. We're going to get to installing this new steering knuckle. We can put the shroud on after the knuckle is installed on the car. Installation should be the reverse of removal, right? It's never that easy though, it seems. But let's give it a shot. First we're going to get everything cleaned up here. We've got our axle shaft back through. We've got our control arm, the lower ball joint, back where it goes. We've got our tie rod end over here. looks like these line up with the holes for those bolts. Looks like everything's going to fit back together the way it should, so that's always a good sign. I'm going to hand tighten our nuts back on here. Now we're just going to get everything tightened back up. These I think I used an 18 to get off of there, but I actually found that 11/16 is a better fit, so I'm going to use the 11/16 to tighten them back up so we don't damage the hardware. And then that one and this one are 19 millimeter. So I gave up waiting on the PB blaster to get the screws on the dust shield off. So I drilled out the old screws, found 2 new screws in my garage that are going to fit. So we're going to put this on. Then we're going to put our washer and axle nut back on. I looked up the torque spec on this and it said 159 foot-pounds, so we set our torque wrench to 159 foot-pounds. And we've got a 1.25 inch socket on here. gonna put the rotor back on, make sure the holes for the screws line up here. Next thing we're going to do is put our caliper back on. Okay guys, it's summer in the desert and my phone overheated, so I didn't get to film putting the caliper back on, but it's really just this bolt here on the bottom and this bolt here on the top that hold it on. I used a 19mm socket for those two bolts, and the torque spec is 70 foot-pounds. Now we have to put our wheel back on and get our lug nuts tightened up. All we gotta do now is take her for a test drive and make sure everything seems okay. Thank you for watching this video on how to replace the wheel bearing and the steering knuckle and a few other parts on this Chevy Aveo. Like, comment, subscribe, tell me I did a crappy job, whatever you want to say. I'll leave the links to some of the parts and tools I used in the description. And thanks again for watching.